Thank you very much for being here. This is the second part of this morning's environment session. And we'll now hear from Michael Schneider, who's our colleague at IATA, who looks after CO2 calculations, and from Sally Davey, who's the Chief Executive of Travalyst. And they'll walk us through some of the work that we've been doing and have an important announcement to make as well. So without further ado, Michael.
Thank you, Nicholas. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here together with Sally. And before I start talking about this very important strategic collaboration, please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Michael Schneider. I'm part of the IATA Environment and Sustainability Division. My focus in recent years has been really on CO2 emissions, airline emissions, but of course also passenger emissions, but also having helped or assisted together, of course, with our membership to build or develop some of the support mechanisms, for example, under CORSIA emissions reporting. So before I start really before we start talking about this strategic collaboration, which is really important for the travel and aviation industry, please allow me to set the scene where we're actually coming from concerning this topic. So basically, the topic of CO2 passenger emissions obviously is not a new topic. It has been around for some time, but it has gained much more attention in recent months, I would say. So there's much more talk about this topic, and really this sort of interest is coming, of course, from the passenger-facing side. Passengers taking a flight would like to understand what is actually the environmental impact from taking a flight. It doesn't stop there. It's also corporates and companies that have set themselves ambitious decarbonization targets or carbon reduction targets. They would like to understand or get some transparency on something that represents the majority of their, what is called the Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions, which would mainly be from or in relation to business travel. And here, the need for them to provide them with relevant and accurate information is quite crucial for them. So basically, what we have seen based on this demand is this proliferation of different CO2 calculators and related methodologies. And I think all of you in the room have maybe made that experience. You would like to book a flight, and you see at one point maybe the CO2 emissions displayed. So if you would go to different providers of ticket sales or search engines or airlines, even for the same flight or for the same origin destination, you would probably get different results. So this is something that is, of course, leading to passenger confusion. But also, I think there is a big risk here on the airline side, because CO2 emissions have become of strategic importance for an airline. For example, airlines, and there's quite a few that have made billion-dollar investments in latest aircraft technology. And here we see that the different results that are often based on theoretical data models are not reflecting actually that investment, because often those, or not often, typically those newer aircraft models are between 10 to 25% more fuel efficient than the previous model. So you want to really see that reflected in this, what is being displayed. So what we see is this lack of harmonization and standardization, and often we see, for example, results are being overstated or understated. When we have done some research in that area, it can sometimes be up to 500%. So this makes it practically impossible, actually, to compare results. So against this backdrop, really, the industry clearly recognized that we need this greater harmonization and collaboration on working together as an industry to address the problem. The first step, really, from the IATA point of view was to look at it from the very specifics of airline aviation. And here, of course, the proliferation that we see is, as I mentioned before, is very concerning. So in order to address this, IATA had actually established a dedicated working group that was basically tasked to develop a set of industry best practices, or recommended practice as we're calling those. And we looked at the very specific operational specifics. And we need to understand that airlines, of course, airlines operating different business models. So you have long-haul carrier, you have short-haul carrier, you have them operating in different parts of the world, and all this need to be taken into account when developing this best practices approach. So also we need to account for other aspects that were greatly discussed in the morning. Of course, SAF. SAF will be one of the largest contributor to decarbonization efforts. And here, the life cycle emission reductions that would be stemming from the SAF that's being deployed needs to be taken into consideration and calculation. And there's some complexities which we hopefully can address further on in the presentation. So by having developed this set of best practices, we didn't do this in complete isolation. We also involved other important stakeholders, for example, the aircraft manufacturers, that validated some of the assumptions that we made, whereby, of course, some of the data that we could draw on was very helpful to make sure whatever comes out of those recommended practices is robust and solid. We had some guiding principles that we followed, and it was really also based on some feedback that we received from travelers, because someone who basically is on the receiver end needs to understand, okay, how are these calculations are being made up? So what goes into that algorithm or into the different elements to calculate emissions? And here, clearly, we also wanted to apply maybe a certain level of pragmatism, so not overcomplicating things. I think we need to be able to still educate the public and the traveler about the impact, obviously, but also on what is the basis of calculation. Accuracy, of course, is another aspect that is super important, that whatever we would be providing to passengers is basically robust, based on data that is, for example, audited, validated, and of course, providing that level of transparency. Resilient as well. Of course, as we move along, we will be introducing newer technology, the use of hydrogen, electric propulsion, etc. All those things that we develop here as a guidance or recommended practice should be future-proof, actually. And that was really the intent of that group. And then not to forget, before we reinventing the wheel or adding additional administrative burden and cost to the airlines, we can actually draw on a very solid and robust set of existing protocols. And we need to always bear in mind we're operating globally. So there are global protocols that have been signed off, for example, under CORSIA. Those could be, for example, fuel measurement protocols and how we measure the fuel uplift and fuel use that basically represents the CO2. There's a simple calculation, obviously, to translate fuel use into CO2 emissions. Plus, of course, then the guidance on how the CO2 emissions or those emissions then are being allocated on a per passenger basis. So here we have a great understanding and technical knowledge and could draw on the operational experience of airlines and manufacturers. But we need to also look at the whole chain of events. And when, of course, it starts with the calculation, with the validation. But then also we need to be able to reach the passenger, basically the end user of that information. Obviously, airlines have their own way of distributing that information via their own websites. But there's a great number of distribution channels that would be, in a way, requires to be aligned or has to be reached with what we're trying to achieve here. And hence, we have Sally here. I'm very delighted to introduce Sally here from Travalyst, who is representing a great number of tech and travel companies that allows us to achieve overall the constant or consistent and farthest reaching distribution of accurate CO2 passenger information. Over to you, Sally.
Thank you, Michael. May I take the clicker? I think I might need that. Thank you so much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you all today. We have been in conversation with Michael and his brilliant team here at IATA for quite some time, and what we find is that we are already incredibly aligned on many of the principles that Michael has just spoken to and our goals of where we need to get to together and as a sector. So we are deeply excited about the potential here for this world-first collaboration. But if I start perhaps by introducing to you Travalyst, which is an independent, not-for-profit organization that is focused on bringing sustainability to the mainstream of travel and notably to the consumer experience so that we can empower consumers to make better choices for themselves and for the planet. So in our function as a secretariat, what we have done is convened a coalition of some of the biggest travel and technology companies in the world to work together in what we call a pre-competitive context, essentially putting aside their potentially competitive interests. Many of these do compete commercially on a day-to-day basis, but through Travalyst they can collaborate in a truly neutral way for the greater good. Now you can see their names on the screen. They do represent together quite unparalleled scale of reach across search, OTAs, GDSs, and to put that into really quite clear terms, the combined market cap of this group is in excess of $1.8 trillion, and I think goes to speak to the potential that we have here. But crucially, we must go beyond rhetoric and firmly into action. Since working together, this coalition has developed a unified approach for bringing consistent emissions data to their mainstream consumer experience. This has obviously required a vast investment of having their product and engineering teams working together consistently, and there has been a significant investment in particular from Google, who have created infrastructure, technological infrastructure in the form of a plug-and-play travel impact model that enables that fully consistent reporting across our partners. So that work has been a vital first step in our efforts to addressing all the challenges that Michael had talked to, the massive challenge of fragmentation, on bringing that those consistent results to the mainstream towards our goal of helping this sector achieve its net zero commitments. But now, together with IATA and their unmatched expertise in aviation, their unmatched scale, we can drive forward this work together for true consistency and impact. So I think it's really important to dive down into the point that Michael made in terms of why this is important, why this work is so urgently needed. It's because consumers want and need this data. IATA have been doing some brilliant work recently to understand consumer demand in more depth, and have found recently that a very clear majority of consumers feel that it is their responsibility to know the carbon footprint of their flight, and that they expect airlines and travel agents to provide them with that information. This is really consistent with data that our partners have found over doing similar surveys over the years. And Booking.com, who do a year-on-year sustainability survey, see a growth in that demand. And this year they're reporting a 10% increase in consumers who believe they need to make more effort in booking sustainable trips. The problem, of course, as Expedia have found, is that the vast majority of consumers just feel totally confused and overwhelmed. There is hope, though. Skyscanner, one of our partners, was a first mover in bringing emissions data to the mainstream experience through their Greener Choices product back in 2019. And data just released shows that 109 million travelers have used that tool to book lower emissions flights on Skyscanner, so that we know that when we bring clear, consistent information to the mainstream consumer experience, we can bridge that intention to action gap, which is what we are working towards together. And that's really why we are joining forces, with the aim of ensuring that we are all providing travellers through all of our channels with that consistent, accurate and widely available calculation of the carbon footprint of a consumer's trip. We'll do that together by driving closer alignment on the calculation of passenger CO2 emissions, and all with that ultimate goal of supporting the decarbonisation of the sector through fully consistent industry-wide emissions reporting that can help drive more targeted action and interventions, including on some areas that have been talked about through the course of the morning, including on sustainable fuels. I cannot stress enough the significance of this relationship in driving forward this vital work. To address the scale of the challenges that we face ahead, we need true systems level thinking, and we need to be bold and brave in the way that we think and the way that we work. This collaboration with IATA brings the whole industry together around a common goal with the explicit commitment of driving industry-wide alignment for the long-term resilience of our sector and of the planet. So I'll hand over to Michael to talk a little more about what that means.
Yep.
Sorry.
Thank you, Sally. Yeah, we felt that maybe it would be good to just give you a little bit of an overview what could potentially, or what could be sort of the areas of collaboration, what actually would entail. And we have here some examples of areas that we can work together. And of course, the aim is really to ensure the highest level of accuracy, and opposed to some of the theoretical models that exist out there, data models. I think we have an ability, or we have the opportunity to look at a little bit more into what is it actually, what exists in terms of data, and we can, in terms of granularity, look at aircraft-specific data, actual airline data, again, opposed to the existing theoretical model that exists. Also, I think it's important that we clearly define what a CO scope here is. And of course, from the airline point of view, the emissions scope results really from, or the emissions really result from the fuel burn. There is, of course, the upstream emission side of things that need to be clearly highlighted in how far, what we're actually covering here in the future in terms of the CO2 emissions. Very clearly also, when it comes to the actual allocation of CO2 emissions, we need to make a clear distinction between, for example, belly cargo CO2 emissions and passengers. So we have a flight that basically needs to account for, maybe on a weight-based basis, that some of the allocation of the emissions have to be attributed to the, whatever is being transported in the hold of an aircraft. Also, we need to account for the precise weighting values by cabin class. So we all understand there's different travel classes, and here the weight and space that is being used in the different classes need to be accounted for. And again, there is a very specific weighting mechanism that could be applied and harmonized in the future. It goes without saying that, and really that we need to also have some very specific guidance on SAF. And there are some really strong complexities here, because unless we have a clearly agreed, a globally agreed accounting framework, it will be actually very difficult to account for those emissions and claims. And this is something that we keep hearing from all the travel stakeholders around, from our airlines, that we need to thread this very careful and making sure that we avoid things like double counting, that we account for the different type of life cycle emission reductions stemming from the feedstock, for example, that is being used to produce that fuel. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done in that respect. And then, of course, when it comes to trust of data, we have to make sure that the data that we put out is independently validated and audited. So really to install that trust that we can provide to passengers and everyone, or corporates as well, of course, give them really this level of comfort. And here again, there is existing protocols that can be used. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. I mentioned under CORSIA, for example, there is a very stringent or robust auditing mechanism already required. And of course, ideally, if we could leverage those existing mechanisms, that would be of great value, because it will reduce additional administrative burden and cost for the industry. So we see really three key areas where there is a really good match here between IATA, the understanding of the technical operational complexities, but also then when it comes to the global and large distribution of data, and of course the tech companies and the travel operators represented by Travalyst have that experience. And here we really focusing on three areas. It is the alignment when it comes to the calculation of emissions, the data part, methodology or recommend practice is only as good as the data that is used within that methodology. And the third part, extremely important, is really the consistent distribution of results. So if we see, again, an airline has made an investment, and if you break it down on a per passenger for a given flight, you would like to see the same results are being displayed on the airline website, but also on any other provider's website. And I think that's here the very strong message and the intent of our collaboration. So let me just maybe conclude what we're trying to achieve with this strategic collaboration. It is, of course, it's all about CO2 transparency, accuracy, and consistency of CO2 emissions. And yeah, I feel that, of course, this is a sort of atypical collaboration. It's not, I mean, in our view, it's really a milestone moment. So it's the first time that airlines and travel technology sector are coming together to work on this. And of course, we will work on some of the emerging areas that we mentioned. And SAF is really, of course, on the forefront and on the mind of everyone here to achieve that together. And I would like to thank Sally and team for this great collaboration so far. So we're looking forward really to take this further. I don't know, Sally, if there's any other things you would like to add in terms of wrapping up the session.
To echo our thanks to the IATA team for their foresight, their leadership in this area, and to echo again, as you've just said, the magnitude of this collaboration, the likes of which have never existed before in the private sector. And I think that just speaks to the shared sense of urgency and commitment that is required to address the scale of the challenges that we face together. But I'm very glad that we're facing those challenges together. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Would I take a few questions? I see one over there. If there's a mic in the room. Yeah, thanks, Kat. And then other questions? Yeah, okay.
Kathy Burke, Aviation International News. Where is the place of IATA, of your CO2 Connect that you launched? Was it in Doha or was it in Boston? I forgot.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, it was in Doha, actually. Yeah, CO2 Connect is really a solution that was developed by IATA, of course, in collaboration. And it embodies really the different components that were already mentioned before, actually. And it's really the standard best practices approach or recommended practices, practice that was developed together with our airlines, coupling this with the data from airlines, looking at aircraft and airline-specific data and the ability also then to make that distribution happen of that data. And that's, of course, is a solution that, as you rightly pointed out, has been released. Yeah, I see there is certainly a great overlap, you could say, or you could potentially see that some interface could here be created, but I think we need to still work on some work more needs to be done, and making sure that we're aligning on some technical aspects, but also when it comes to some of the principles on how we calculate before we can look at some interface basically between those two parties.
Next question over there. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris Urgener from Green Air. Just to be clear, I mean, lots of carbon calculators out there, not just on the booking platforms, but carbon offset providers often use these flight CO2 calculators. ICAO has a CO2 calculator. Is the whole idea of what you're trying to do here to standardize everybody around one calculation, as it were, or does it allow for a bit of changing and so on according to circumstances, like, for example, some offsetters like to add non-CO2 effects to their calculator?
It's up to you. I can take this, or would you like to start?
I can start, yeah, maybe. Yeah, of course, that we are fully conscious that there is quite a few number of different methodologies and calculators out there. Of course, the last thing we want to see is a further proliferation of those calculators. And the intent is really to make people understand, look, we have developed something by the industry for the industry. which really greatly reflects operational realities, right? And some of those methodologies that we see out there are based on theoretical models, basically not really reflecting what we see happening in reality, and whether it be load factors, whether it be fuel burn, latest aircraft models often are not actually reflected on those models. So we would hope that, with further alignment, that we see others basically following the way. And of course, we have developed this recommended practice, which is freely available to everyone to adopt. And we see actually, with time, larger adoption of the methodology happening. Yeah, I would hope that this also sends out a signal here, this collaboration, that I think that we're on the right track, that we're combining forces in the sense that we can reach that consistency of results happening on the large scale.
Exactly that. I think ultimately this is all about consistency. Everybody benefits from consistency. The industry benefits, consumers benefit, and the environment benefits, but it has to be done at scale. So I think this, exactly as Michael said, this partnership really signals that that has to be our priority.
Thank you. Next question, Kat, if you could. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, this is Andreas Scholz, freelance from Hamburg. Can you tell me when the project is ready to launch, so really turns into practice and is available for everyone? And second, as far when you had these preparations, working groups and so on, I assume you also involved some big corporates. Can you name some who took part in this survey?
I suppose we can start by saying that...
I mean corporates,
yes,
business, so business travelers who of course, will one of the key players and
yes.
taking part.
So I'd say the collaboration is very much, as you say, already underway. That will now become a more formal collaboration to work together on an ongoing basis to drive forward that alignment on an ongoing basis over time. I wouldn't say that there's a particular date or moment in time, but there will be continual updates and checkbacks as we do make progress towards further alignment and to bringing that again to full scale. I think you make a great point about the critical role of corporate travelers and enabling them not just to make better choices, but also to be able to report on those choices at scale. There are also a number of conversations and collaborations that are as yet not public, but it is a key driving factor of this work.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, there are clear expectations from the corporate world to have this alignment. So this is what we're hearing. Obviously, we wouldn't sort of work on this so feverishly if we wouldn't have that pressure. And the pressure is not only IATA, it's actually the airlines are expected also to report, to provide specific reports to corporates. Those are big accounts for them. This is a very important customer base for the airlines. And there are very clear demands in that direction because they're dealing, I mean, the corporates dealing with different airlines. Obviously, they're not simply flying with one single airline. And here, the alignment in terms of calculation, what is actually becoming part of that calculation, the scope of emissions, all those things that are important to be recognized, SAF use, carbon offsets, that we have a full alignment or the best possible alignment.
Thank you very much. So we are coming to the end of that Q&A, but if you have any more questions, Michael and Sally will be available a little bit further. Sorry, a little bit longer. And I would like to thank you very much. This has been really interesting and, as you said, really a milestone moment. So glad that we were able to talk about it in front of you today. So thank you again.